Everyone thought they knew Ted Williams. To most of America, he was the splendid splinter, the greatest pure hitter the game of baseball had ever seen. His swing was perfection, his statistics unshakable, and his stubborn refusal to tip his cap became part of his myth. But behind the records and the roar of Fenway Park lived a man caught in a storm of contradictions. He was celebrated and despised, adored and booed, a war hero who saved lives in the cockpit of a fighter plane and yet struggled to save his own family from collapse. He was larger than life, yet deeply wounded by a childhood of absence and neglect. He was a perfectionist on the field, but often reckless off it, a man who poured compassion into strangers' children, but could not find peace with his own. Even in death, his name became the center of controversy, remembered not only for a .406 batting average, but for the scandal of cryonics. To understand Ted Williams is to explore both triumph and tragedy, the soaring peaks of human achievement and the lonely valleys of private despair. This is not just the story of a ball player. This is the story of America's most complicated hero. He grew up in San Diego, in a small, fractured household where love was scarce and absence was constant. His father drifted away. His mother consumed herself in Salvation Army work, and young Ted and his brother Danny were left to raise themselves in a world where the house felt more like an empty shell than a home. Those early years forged in him an iron self-reliance. Baseball became his sanctuary, the only place where he felt safe and in control. He swung broomsticks until his hands blistered, threw balls until the light disappeared, and obsessed over the science of contact as if it were the only truth worth pursuing. That isolation made him brilliant, but also brittle. The very drive that pushed him to greatness also carved deep grooves of anger and mistrust. He could not forgive his mother's absence, and he never truly forgot the loneliness that shaped him. For millions of Americans who later watched him play, he was the ultimate craftsman. But inside, he was still that child abandoned to his own devices, chasing worth through the crack of a bat. When Boston signed him as a teenager, the city had no idea what kind of firestorm it was inheriting. In 1939, a skinny kid from San Diego arrived at Fenway Park and immediately set the town ablaze with home runs and swagger. 31 home runs, 145 RBIs, and a rookie season so luminous that even the hardened Boston press could not ignore it. But adoration quickly soured. The same city that cheered his swing grew restless with his defiance. He refused to play by the unspoken rules of politeness. He clashed with journalists who invaded his privacy. When a columnist mocked him for not visiting his mother during the off-season, the wound cut so deep he carried the anger for decades. Fans, quick to idolize and quicker to condemn, booed him when his production dipped. His response was to withdraw, to stop tipping his cap, to feed off the venom as though it were fuel. He built a reputation as arrogant, hostile, even cruel. Yet beneath that mask was a young man still aching for approval, still longing for affection that had been denied in childhood. Boston, tough and unforgiving, became both his crucible and his curse. The summer of 1941 remains the most sacred chapter of his career. While Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak dominated headlines, Williams quietly chased something rarer: a 400 season. As the year drew to a close, his batting average hovered at .3996, which could be rounded up to 400 in the record books. Manager Joe Cronin offered him the option to sit out, to preserve his place in history. But Williams refused. "If I'm going to be a 400 hitter," he declared, "I want to earn it all the way." On the final day, in a doubleheader, he went 6 for 8, raising his average to .406, cementing his name in eternity. That number has never been matched. It is a monument to his philosophy: accept no shortcuts, take no easy victories. For Americans, his defiance was inspiring, yet it also revealed his essence: stubborn, uncompromising, unyielding, even to common sense. The decision not only defined his career, but encapsulated his entire life. He would rather fail honestly than succeed by calculation. But baseball was not the only arena that defined Ted Williams. When war came, he set aside the bat and picked up the flight stick. Unlike many athletes who found ways to avoid service, Williams plunged into duty, first in World War II and later in Korea. He excelled as a pilot, a man whose obsessive precision translated perfectly into the cockpit. His fellow Marines marveled at his coordination, his ability to feel the plane as if it were an extension of his body. In Korea, he survived near death when his jet was engulfed in flames, skidding across the runway, a mile-long trail of fire behind him. By sheer miracle, he lived. He lost nearly 5 prime years of baseball to war, years that could have further swollen his record book. But he never complained. His sense of service was real, his courage undeniable. Few athletes of his stature ever risked as much, and fewer still returned to reclaim their greatness. That dual identity, slugger and soldier, made him more than an athlete. It made him an American archetype. And yet, for all his valor, his baseball life was haunted by an absence that no medal could repair. He never won a World Series. In 1946, after returning from the war, he finally had his chance. The Red Sox reached the Fall Classic against the St. Louis Cardinals. The city braced for triumph, but Williams was hobbled by an injury, his bat quiet when it mattered most. The Red Sox lost, and Williams wept, devastated not just by defeat, but by the realization that the opportunity might never return. It never did. He would retire with batting titles, MVPs, Triple Crowns, but no championship ring. DiMaggio, his eternal rival, piled rings upon rings, cementing a legacy of team success that Williams could not match. The contrast became a cruel refrain, great hitter, but what did he ever win? The weight of that critique shadowed him to the end, as if personal brilliance could not wash away collective failure. Away from the diamond, Ted Williams was a man of extremes. He could be explosive, profane, intimidating to anyone who crossed him. Reporters dreaded his tirades. Fans sometimes recoiled from his contempt. He spat at hecklers, cursed journalists, and carried grudges with volcanic intensity. And yet he poured unmeasured compassion into the Jimmy Fund, a charity for children battling cancer. He visited hospitals, raised money, and gave his time freely. It was here that the contradictions of his soul were most visible. The man who seemed incapable of grace with adults was endlessly tender with children in pain. He saw in their suffering perhaps a reflection of his own lost childhood, a reminder of wounds no one had healed. His generosity became legendary, though he often refused recognition for it. In these moments, the mask of anger slipped, revealing the depth of his humanity. His personal life was far less noble. Marriage after marriage collapsed. He was restless, volatile, often cruel in intimacy. His daughter Bobby Jo grew up feeling abandoned. His son, John Henry, bore the impossible weight of carrying his father's name. Williams demanded perfection from himself and expected it from those around him, but family life does not bend to perfectionism. He found in fishing a solace that no relationship could provide, hours spent in solitude on the water, chasing mastery in silence. Friends saw him as both magnetic and impossible, a man who could charm you one moment and scorch you the next. For his children, love was often tangled with fear, admiration with resentment. It was the price of greatness lived without compromise. As age softened the edges of his public image, honors flowed. He entered the Hall of Fame on his first ballot, his number retired, his legend celebrated. The crowning moment came at the 1999 All-Star Game in Fenway Park, where a fragile, aged Williams was wheeled onto the field. The ovation shook the stadium. Players young and old flocked to him like disciples to a saint, eyes wide, voices hushed in awe. It was a collective forgiveness, Boston embracing the man it once scorned. For Williams, who had long resisted vulnerability, it was perhaps the first time he allowed himself to feel fully loved by the city he had fought against. The ovation was not just for the hitter who defied numbers, but for the man who endured, flawed yet unforgettable. But death brought its own storm. When he passed in 2002, his will requested cremation and scattering of ashes in the Florida Keys. Yet his son John Henry produced a signed note claiming Williams wanted cryonic preservation, his body frozen in the hope of one day being revived. The revelation ignited scandal, lawsuits, and headlines that tarnished his legacy. Instead of solemn tributes to his swing, the public fixated on tanks of liquid nitrogen in Arizona. Ted Williams, the frozen ball player, became a punchline. For many, the memory of his 406 season blurred beneath the spectacle of science fiction and family betrayal. Whether he consented or not, whether it was his wish or his son's ambition, the controversy became part of his story. Another contradiction piled atop a lifetime of paradoxes. And yet, when history speaks, it is not cryonics that endures. It is the sight of his swing, the way the bat cut through the zone with surgical precision. It is the knowledge that no one since has reached 400, that his book, The Science of Hitting, still instructs generations of players. It is the image of young stars like Tony Gwynn and Wade Boggs studying his method, trying to capture even a fragment of his genius. His influence echoes in every batting cage, in every player who seeks to master not just the art, but the science of baseball. The controversies fade, but the craft remains. That, more than anything, is his true immortality. Ted Williams lived as a contradiction, soldier and slugger, hero and villain, perfectionist and flawed man. His story is not one of simplicity, but of complexity that mirrors the American spirit itself. He embodied the pursuit of excellence, the stubborn refusal to compromise, and the painful costs of living with such unrelenting fire. He was the greatest hitter who ever lived, and also a reminder that greatness comes wrapped in imperfection. Ted Williams wanted nothing more than to be remembered as the greatest hitter of all time. On that front, he succeeded beyond dispute. His numbers remain untouchable, his swing studied like sacred scripture. But the full story of Ted Williams is larger, darker, and more human. He was a boy abandoned by parents, a man who sought love from a city that gave him both cheers and jeers, a warrior who risked his life for his country, and a father who often failed the people closest to him. Even in death, his name became a battleground between legacy and scandal. And yet, perhaps that is why his story matters so much. Williams was not a flawless statue to be admired from afar. He was flesh and blood, temper and tenderness, brilliance and brokenness. His contradictions remind us that heroes are not perfect. They are human, and it is their humanity that makes them worth remembering. When we speak of Ted Williams, we do not only recall a 406 season or a frozen controversy. We remember the fire, the defiance, the relentless pursuit of something pure. And in that pursuit, he became immortal, not just in numbers, but in the story of America itself.